Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a pair of my own New Orleans games, and I don't actually think I've featured this ship before, so not only are you seeing a ship I've not covered before, but you're going to see two different aspects of it as well. This first game is going to be really all about the radar. In terms of the damage done directly by myself, it's not particularly impressive, but I did think that just the opportunities I got to use radar in this one and how effective it happened to be under these circumstances, I figured it might be interesting to show it off. So this is more of a scouting game, if anything. It's like one of those games in World of Tanks where you see somebody sitting in a bush and they get humongous amounts of spotting damage. That's kind of what this is going to be. It's not to say I don't do some damage myself, but it's not a lot. So I've started off by following in this Fletcher, and I had the thought I was going to use one of these islands. And this is actually a decent map for using radar because there are bits of cover that you can use to radar from behind. But as it is, the Fletcher laid some smoke, so we've ended up with a rather mutually beneficial arrangement. I got his smoke, he got my radar, and this enemy Fletcher had no clue I was here. It's a bit bad luck for him because if I'd spawned on the other side, I'd have radared C, but as it is, well, our own Fletcher's still alive and kicking, and we've knocked out that enemy Fletcher, and we're about to cap. Now, the enemy team do have their own radar cruiser, they've got a Des Moines, but he is over at C, so there's no chance of getting counter-radared here. And it's quite nice when you get this kind of matchup where the number of radar ships are in fact balanced, because radar is a very powerful tool. And I've had some games where it's like one team has 3 radar ships and the other team has none. And you can guess how those go, especially if they're domination, because the team that has none, well, none of the destroyers want to go and contest the caps because they know there's an extremely good chance they'll just get radared and deleted, especially if any of the radar cruisers happen to have the radar mod, which extends how long it's active for. And I've been caught out by that myself a couple of times in destroyers, where you're thinking, okay, it's been, 25-ish seconds, surely the radar will expire by now, but no, it just keeps going. So instead of trying to play for damage and maybe going forwards, popping off some shots against those ships to the north, even at that Iowa, which I could be firing at right now, I decided to stay stealthed up and head across to C. And this is one of the advantages of this versus the premium American Tier 7 cruisers that get radar, the Indianapolis and the Atlanta. I mean, the Indianapolis these days has been buffed, it gets 10 kilometers now, but because it's Tier 7, it can't get the concealment system. So although you've got that 10 kilometer range, which is actually, well, I say 10, it's like 9.9 something, even though that's better than what this has, which is I think 9.1 kilometers, 9.1 is about what you can get your concealment level down to as well. So you can at least be sure that you're not going to get spotted up until the point where you can radar something anyway. But that also does make it quite risky in terms of sometimes getting close enough to use radar. So there are some games I play in this where I just don't get to use the radar at all. So that was a usage just to check where things are, basically. I mean, we're about even on numbers, but a lot of the enemy team is, or a lot of the remaining enemy team is bunched up here. And so if we can root them out, if I can use my radar and spot people and get other people to do the damage, because bear in mind this is a tier 10 game, I don't particularly want to go head to head with the Des Moines. If he just starts putting out 8-inch HE shells against me every 5 seconds, that's going to be very bad news. So yes, I'd rather like to just spot these people rather than try and take on multiple enemy ships myself, because there's a Minotaur around here as well. So I'm not particularly keen on diving in head first. And that's one of the nice things about the New Orleans versus, say, the Mogami. It's got that utility that even in this bottom tier situation, there's the potential to still be useful to your team, even if trying to do the damage is maybe going to be incredibly risky. And I find that a lot in the Mogami is that you don't have that extra utility for the radar, and so it's just a matter of, well, I can try and stay stealthed or I can try and do damage. And sometimes you've got the unenviable choice of you either have a really sucky game because it's too risky to try and do damage and you're not really helping your team, or you do try but you just get instantly blatted by a battleship or a higher tier cruiser. I will note here as well, I mean, I've mentioned the tier 7 Americans. I mean, the Atlanta and the I think that's got the same range as the Belfast now, actually. I think that was buffed because it was like 7-ish kilometers, and I think the Indianapolis was the same. But I think the Soviet ships generally, just with the extra range they get on their radar, are probably the more powerful for it. And, you know, if I had to choose of the tier 8 cruisers that I've played so far, honestly, I would take the Chapayev, even though it's a very awkward ship in the water. Just the range it gets, that fast-firing 6-inch HE that it gets, and the fact that it can radar from stealth with that extra range that it gets if you've got Concealment Expert and the Concealment module. It's a very, very good combination, but it's tougher trying to get in close because of that poor maneuverability. So that was my final use of the radar. I'm not going to get much more damage. In fact, this is pretty much it. We've basically won at this point. There's about 2.5 minutes left on this game, but the remaining Bismarck was all the way up north, so that's pretty much it. I've done 36,000 damage. However, I've done considerably more that in terms of more than that even in terms of spotting. And unlike World of Tanks, where it does give you ribbons when you've gotten spotting damage, Warships doesn't tell you that exactly. So my best guess is that around half the spotting damage I'm going to have will have been directly as a result of radar, and the rest I just randomly picked up. So there we go. It's not a terrible result considering, and then you see I'm third on the team, 1648. And yes, I damaged some higher tier destroyers, which obviously helps a lot with that score. But then if you look at the spotting damage, 104,000 spotting damage. And normally, even in like a destroyer, you know, I count it as a decent game if I've gotten sort of 50-60k spotting damage. So as far as I can tell, something like 40 to 50,000 was directly from the radar. But it's a little bit hard to tell because the game doesn't really tell you. But anyway, I thought that was a bit interesting in that it's a game that was much more about using the radar than anything else. But the next one I've got for you is going to be hopefully a little bit more entertaining. So this time round, it's going to be a top tier game with not that many lower tiers actually. There's a couple of tier 7s, and our team has a very unlucky where are we? An Alba. Oh, there's actually a Farragut as well. The enemy team has a Farragut. So we've got 2 tier 6s and they've got 1. So yeah, pretty unlucky for them. But generally speaking, yeah, good matchmaking for being top tier. And also, it's a standard game, which gives it a rather different complexion, especially in terms of using the radar. Now, we open up with me actually firing off one very early in just to see if there's anybody coming down the middle passage. Not that I needed to, because there's this Akatsuki who appeared to be just going forwards towards their doom, especially as either himself or myself with the radar, probably him actually peeking out there, have found an Atlanta. And normally, if you run face first into an Atlanta in a destroyer, you're going to die very quickly. But in this case, he slams on the brakes and is able to reverse, presumably whilst also having the smoke on, quickly enough that he survives but still does lose some health in the process. So this gave me not a great feeling about this destroyer to begin with. I kind of assumed that this wasn't a great player, that they were just going to you know, get themselves killed for really nothing in return. But sometimes things go not exactly as you expect. So as this is a standard game and there's not the usual tussling over the caps, and on Two Brothers that can make for some very awkward gameplay, because you can either have the carousel effect where you've got the majority of one team going around one side and the majority of the other team going around the other side, and then it's just a race to get to the caps, except Of course, in this one, you can get people running through the middle to reset, potentially, but also you get people just trying to run through the middle generally. So this potentially could be really awkward. I'm certainly not keen on just running out into open water because, yeah, as I've said, the stealth on this is pretty good, but you've still got that, what, 20 seconds or so between you firing and then re-stealthing. During which time you can get hit really hard. So I was playing this pretty cautiously, and I don't have anybody to take the heat for me this time. I'm not playing in a division, and I don't have any friendly destroyers laying down smoke, because there's only a couple of destroyers on each side, and I think the enemy team's lost one already. So it is a rather different situation, and I'm not actually going to get that far from our cap circle at any point. This was, even given that it is quite a different situation, I haven't had too many games on Two Brothers that have ended up being like this, and you'll see exactly how it works out. So we know that Atlanta's definitely still in there. I'm trying to put myself in a position where I can get some fire in at something. You notice I triggered the defensive there. I was thinking maybe I could take out that spotter plane, but I'm not quite close enough. Then, lo and behold, well, that Atlanta's been joined by at least one cruiser, and the York is kind of bad news, but he's firing HE, and I know he's reloading. So, although that was a little bit risky going broadside to a York this close, even if he has loaded AP at this point, I'm now at a much better angle. But yeah, he could potentially do some nasty damage to me, but fortunately he doesn't. So there's the Atlanta, and there's an Indianapolis there. So this is 3 cruisers that have decided to sit in the middle. That's, you know, even with my limited math skills, I can tell you that's actually a pretty big proportion of the enemy team. That's a quarter of the enemy team that have decided to just sit in the passage there. And that's not really a great place for them to be, because none of them has any smoke to conceal them. And they're basically bottled up there. The bad news for the Akatsuki, though, is if he wants to make a torpedo run, 2 of those 3 ships have radar. And although this is before, I think this was like a 6.5, this particular match when it was played. Although this was before the Indianapolis's buff, and it was only 7-point-something kilometers, it doesn't matter, you know, that Akatsuki would be close enough to get spotted. So I've pinged off my own radar again, but only the York is within the detection range. So yeah, this one was a bit of a wasted usage, really. It's getting them spotted, certainly, but it's not that useful. It's not like they're in smoke or anything like that. So yeah, this one, you know, the first one was much more about the use of radar. This one's going to be a bit less so. Although there is one use of the radar later on, which is very useful for the team. Anyway, so the Akatsuki decides at this point to push across with his smoke and drop some torpedoes in their face, although it looks like the York is getting absolutely hammered by one of our battleships. Anyway, there we go, the North Carolina takes him out. And possibly he had banked on their radar being on cooldown, but as you could see there, either the Indianapolis or the Atlanta had fired off their radar, so the Akatsuki took a little bit of damage to that. Well, actually more than a little bit. That was probably like another third of their hit points. So that was very risky, but they got away with it again. I don't know if they actually did any damage, but it's blocked their line of sight. And this is the point where it would have been useful to have a radar available, because then I could radar and we could spot those things and shoot at them without being spotted in return. Meanwhile, on the rest of the map, we've got a couple of things closing in from the left flank. I think we lost some ships over there. They lost some ships, but they've also had some ships that have fallen back to their own cap. On the other side, it looks like most of the teammates that were there have fallen back to our cap, and there are a pair of Tier 8 battleships pushing up on that side. And then there's still these 3 ships here. Well, 2 ships, and there's also a Kutuzov a little further back, because of course the York has been killed already. So Atlanta had come forward. I don't know what these cruisers were thinking. I really don't. It was such a weird thing to do. But you know, it's good for us because it's going to get them killed and it's going to mean more damage for me. So that's the Atlanta down. the Indianapolis, we're probably, well, I am probably at just about the edge of his torp range, but I've noticed this Tirpitz is going to be coming into view reasonably soon as well, and as the Indianapolis is backing off, this seems like not a terrible spot to just hang around for a moment and see if I can't get a bit more damage done. Now, as you can see, our hood had taken a bit of a battering, but we've got plenty of healthy ships around here as well. As of the ships that were going around to the enemy cap on the west side, it's the other New Orleans, and whatever destroyer was there is dead already. So that New Orleans alone is basically a bit screwed. You know, he's got no support. He didn't have the sense to back off and regroup or whatever. So yeah. On score, this is pretty damn close. There's not a lot of points in it. And we're also, I think, exactly equal on ships at the moment. So there's all the, you know, this is all left to play for at this point. This could go either way. And provided nobody does anything completely stupid, there's no reason we can't win this. But if somebody does do something completely stupid, we might well not. And we know for sure that New Orleans is a bit screwed. So we'll see. We'll see how it works out. So that's the remaining enemy destroyer on this side as well. But Wave of Torps is a bit of a giveaway. Now Akatsuki's going forward to spot. I myself am detected, but they're concentrating on other things at the moment, which shoots me. It suits me just fine. Although having said that, hello. I don't know if that was aimed at somebody behind me and just clipped me, but my indicator didn't tell me that someone was shooting at me. So the Akatsuki got spotted, and that Shiratsu is actually quite healthy, so that's not great news. And if he's using the torpedo accelerator, there might be more torps on the way soon as well, so we have to be careful here. Anyway, the Shiratsu decides it's a bit hot and smokes up. Obviously us bigger ships are spotted, but it's good news for the Akatsuki, at least temporarily, because he's not got a lot of health now, so he won't be spotted anymore. This does also give me an opportunity to use the radar to help my teammates, because if I can radar that Shiratsuyu into smoke, we can take them out there, and that makes dealing with these battleships a lot simpler. And it'll also make my battleship teammates a bit more confident as well, because quite often if you get a destroyer poking around like that, suddenly the battleships just want to fall back, because, you know, the chances of them spotting are quite low unless the destroyer in question kind of messes up. Anyway, so there's more torps incoming, and oh hello, this is where the maneuverability of the New Orleans comes in quite handy. And with that Shiratsu having apparently taken quite a big hit while they were in the smoke or just in the process of cloaking, that meant they were on low health. Bad news is I'm in open water now and fairly close to this Bismarck and Tirpitz, but they're not looking at me right now. Although having said that, oh okay, that's at least one of them is, two of them were, both of them were temporarily, but yeah. You might have noticed, by the way, two of our own cruisers making a counter push through the middle passage into the other three enemy ships who are all in their cap, and you can kind of guess how that is going to go, because the Kutuzov's got torps, and I don't know, I think there might be a Tirpitz there as well. Yeah, there is in fact a Tirpitz there, so if they try and push around the corner, they're just going to die. If they don't, well, the Kutuzov or whoever else might just be able to torp into the passage anyway. So they're in a very risky position and not a particularly useful position. It's stopping the enemy team pushing through the middle again, but it puts them in a place where nobody can really help them. And if they die there, then well, it's not really ships we can afford to lose, because that New Orleans did of course die. So this low health Tirpitz is definitely the priority. There's also a Bismarck there, and oh there we go, yeah, we just lost, what was that, the Alba and the Belfast, I think. So yeah, although actually no, the Belfast isn't dead yet, it's trying to back off, but we'll see how that goes for him. Anyway, so if we take out the Tirpitz, that's useful. The Bismarck is also below half health. Okay, that was a kill for me. So if we just concentrate our firepower here, that should work rather well. And this is the kind of situation you want to be in a cruiser, where you outnumber a battleship and then you just have your fingers crossed that they fire at somebody else. And I'm hoping that my relatively high health makes me a less attractive target than a lower health ship. But sometimes people will prioritise cruisers because they're a lot squashier and a lot easier to kill. But in this case, the Bismarck isn't. The Bismarck is going for our North Carolina. Possibly with the intention of ramming, or maybe just with the intention of getting close enough to unleash a devastating broadside. But that gives me an opportunity to try and finish him off as I finished off the Tirpitz. And at that point, it's just the other 3 remaining enemy ships to deal with. So the Bismarck is pretty close to death. We actually just lost... I remembered the Belfast dying, but I hadn't remembered that they died in a collision. So yeah, the New Orleans rammed the Belfast. So that was a bit of a silly move, to be honest, from the New Orleans, unless he was very low health. Neither of them had torpedoes to be a threat to each other. So yeah, they lost their remaining radar ship, and we lost a fairly powerful ship in the form of the Belfast as well. So we're ahead now, but it's still less than 100 points, and it all depends what these enemy ships intend to do. Depend to do? Yeah, that doesn't make sense. We're not entirely sure what health they are, but we're going to find out very soon, because as it turns out, they do decide to come through the middle. And I left that bit in there sped up so you can just see the back and forth in the chat, because this was one of those rare-ish games where, you know, we're in this tight situation. It's 3 versus 2, not a lot of points in it, and we were all communicating with each other, which was rather nice. It doesn't always happen that way, but, you know, everyone was... of the opinion, and everyone understood that the best thing to do was to hold tight, use our points advantage, and let that force them to come to us. Because if they're going to come through the middle, which they kind of had to do, because time's running out, we've got less than 3 minutes in this, that puts them at a disadvantage. That puts them in a situation that we can use. So the Tirpitz has turned his guns on me. The Kutuzov, it looks like, is aiming at me as well. And this is what I'm talking about, where, I mean, yeah, I'm the closest ship, but I'm by far the squashiest ship here as well. So, you know, if anybody here is the easiest kill, it's me. Except the Tirpitz is now pointing his guns at the North Carolina. So if they both try to focus me down, I might well not have lived. But as it is, there goes the Kutuzov, and now that just leaves this one lone Tirpitz who's not on a lot of health. Now, I was thinking of turning to try and get my front turrets there, but he decided to aim his guns at me, so I've straightened up again, which only leaves me with my rear turret. But once again, he's switched his attention, so now I'm going to try and make the turn and hope that he doesn't notice. Or at least if he does, I've got a little bit of time while he's reloading. So bringing the front guns around, which obviously increases my firepower rather considerably, and it looks like he's pointing his guns at me again, but it's all a bit too late because he's about to die. The question is, can I get that final kill? Oh, those shatters, come on. If I can not hit the turrets, that would be good. He's actually now backing up, but it's not going to do much good. So I get the final kill, as it turns out, and it was a pretty reasonable result. 94,000 damage done, and 4 kills. Not quite the Kraken. I'm not sure what else I could have gone for to get the Kraken there, but that ended up being a very, very close game. And we actually had some nice teamwork at the end there. You know, it was that Belfast was. It surprised me how far he was up the team, but obviously they did a fair bit of damage. The 2 surviving battleships did reasonably well for themselves, and that Akatsuki, not the best player in the world, but you know, they managed not to completely suicide in the way that I assumed they were going to, and so you know, they were able to contribute something. This hasn't been, I should probably point out, this hasn't been the highest damage game I've had in New Orleans. I have done over 100k, but not that much over 100k, and it's more that this was a really close game at the end, or it felt like quite a close, tense game at the end, compared to some of the other games I've had where I've been lucky enough not to get targeted and just insta-blatted and have been able to set fires. But in terms of doing damage with tier 8 cruisers, I mean, I've had far better games than the Chapayev, and by far the very best games I've had have been, unsurprisingly, in the Kutuzov with IFHE, where you can comfortably, without that much effort, reach kind of like 120, 150 plus thousand damage. and because it's a premium ship, you can make quite a lot of money at the same time. So it's definitely not as capable as that, but then the Kutuzov, like the Chapayev, just has those rather nasty 6-inch Soviet guns. So that's it for the New Orleans, and hopefully an interesting pair of replays. I know the first one wasn't fun, air quotes, but I did think the use of radar might be of interest to some people, and it's one of the games where I've had more success with radar than a lot of the other matches I've had, because like I say, sometimes you just don't get to use it, or you just completely miscalculate when to use it. But I'm getting better at it. I'm definitely getting better at figuring out when's a good time. So hopefully you've enjoyed both these games, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.